Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of Sports Spectrum is brought to you by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. We're so thankful to have them as sponsors here with us at Sports Spectrum. 66 years of experience, they've found that the most effective way to care for children in need is through the local church. And it's why they partner with more than 7,000 local churches in 25 countries to deliver God's love and care to children in need, one child at a time. More than 2 million children today are breaking the cycle of poverty for good because of Compassion International. And here's where you and I can come in. It's $38 a month, and it's an opportunity for you to release a child from poverty. We're talking about food, education, medical care, vocational training, giving a child hope. It's all done in Jesus' name, and that's where Compassion does it right. $38 a month. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum. That's the website, compassion.com/sportspectrum, and consider releasing a child from poverty today. Today on the podcast, we learn the story of Chad Carr, Chad Tough. Chad's mom, Tammi Carr, is our guest here on the podcast. And we can't talk to Chad because Chad is no longer with us. Chad was a precious, beautiful, fun-loving boy who on September 23rd, 2014 was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor, DIPG, diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma. 3 days later, he spent his fourth birthday in the Coach Carr unit, his grandfather, Lloyd Carr, the legendary Michigan coach, at Mott Children's Hospital in Ann Arbor, Michigan. This was a hard podcast because I'm a dad. My daughter just turned 15 and can't imagine losing her. And we just have one child. Tammi Carr is the mom to three boys. And one of those boys was Chad Carr. And initially, I wasn't even sure if we should be even doing this type of an interview. In many ways, I was scared because it's not comfortable talking to people about the loss of their child. It just in a worldly sense, it's not supposed to happen, right? But I'm really glad that Tammi was willing to come on. I'm really glad that she shared Chad's story, and I'm really glad that she talked about how open she is about her faith and how her faith really sustained her during what's the most difficult time any parent could ever go through with her son, Chad. Take a listen to this interview. I know you'll be inspired. I know you'll be encouraged by Tammi Carr. And I'm going to say the foundation website now, and I'm going to say it again on the back end because it's doing amazing work. ChadTough.org is the Chad Carr Foundation, ChadTough.org. And Tammi will tell us at the end of the interview, but I'm going to say it again here. They've raised close to $10 million. Talk about an impact. Wow. Close to $10 million for research. Let's learn the story of Chad Carr with his mom, Tammi Carr, joining us here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Tammi, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason.
It's good to talk to you, Tammi. And there's a lot to talk about, obviously, here that we can get into. But I think just starting out with the life that you lived growing up, I think might be fun to kind of dive into first. Because, as I mentioned, your dad is a former Michigan safety and played with the Wolverines and a college football Hall of Famer. And your father-in-law is the legendary coach, Lloyd Carr, from Michigan. So tell me about what that life was like growing up as a kid and maybe some early sports memories for you.
Oh, I grew up basically loving the Wolverines. You don't really have a choice, I guess. Fight Song was probably one of the first songs I learned. I remember my dad, this is a very strong memory. I have two brothers. I'm the oldest, but I was probably, I played sports and all kinds of sports and was a tomboy and probably more like a son in some ways to my father. I actually was involved in sports more than my brothers. So I have memories, though, of my brother coming down and, like, he had these, like, scarlet and gray underwear. And he would, like, come out and be like, Dad, look what I'm wearing. And my dad would, like, pretend to beat him up. Like, it was, like, ingrained from, you know, when you're little. And, you know, I loved the Wolverines, and I ended up going to Michigan, where I met my husband. We were friends all through college. We aren't, like, college sweethearts or anything. And then ended up reconnecting at the Rose Bowl when Michigan won the national championship. So we ran into each other in California, actually, and now we've been married 18 years. So
when you met Jason, that's your husband, and married him, and kind of got into that world, before you even knew him, obviously you were friends in college, I presume you knew who his dad was, but did you have any idea that Lloyd Carr was this guy's father and he was the legendary coach at Michigan?
Well, you know what's funny is when I was in school, his dad was not the head coach until, was it my junior or senior season? So I knew Coach Carr. I worked, Jason, actually, they had just started that Team Blue when I was in college, which is they have, like, girls helping with the recruits. And I remember he said, I need some girls that know something about sports. You know, can you guys come help? And I'm like, what is that? That sounds weird. Like, I'm not doing anything. What are you talking about? He's like, oh, we need, like, to sit at games and, like, you know, talk to the parents. And I was like, oh my gosh. So you roped me into that my senior year. And but so I knew who his father was for sure. But I don't think, you know, he had just started my senior year or junior year. He was just his first few years as head coach. So, it wasn't the entire time. But my dad has known, you know, Lloyd for forever. I remember one of my first memories of Michigan is coming up to a family reunion, because my family's all from the Midwest, mostly from Ohio. My dad's actually from the Cleveland area and left Ohio to come to Michigan to play. So most of my family is in Ohio, but my grandfather at that time lived in Manchester. When I was about 10 years old, we had this huge family reunion where we came up here. And I remember him taking us to the big house. And I remember meeting Lloyd, which is funny, because he was looking for Coach Moeller, and Coach Moeller wasn't there. And so I remember talking to Lloyd, which is just funny when I think back on that.
That is funny.
Where life takes you.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into the story of Chad, and certainly I want to talk about your faith as well, but tell me about Grandpa, I don't even know what you call him, Grandpa Lloyd and Grandpa Tom, and kind of the differences in having them as father figures and fathers compared to becoming the grandparents that they are now, and what that dynamic looks like. Yeah,
so we have funny, Lloyd is Papa.
Okay.
That's his nickname. And then the funniest part is my father, Tom, is Pee-Pee. I don't know how that happened. Our oldest kind of named him that. And we would laugh about it. And now he's 14 and a little, so he's kind of changed it to Peeps, because I think he has a little bit of, it comes out funny sometimes.
That's funny.
Pee-Pee. Yeah, so those are their names, and they're great grandfathers. They, you know, our boys are very entrenched in the travel baseball world and the AAU basketball, and we only allow them to start playing football in 7th grade when there's middle school football. But our oldest that's his passion now. And he's a quarterback and talented, and it's crazy to see. But his grandparents, both boys, they love watching them play sports. And whenever they're around, Lloyd lives part-time down in South Carolina, and my dad lives in Miami still, but has a home here in Saline. So they're here a lot, and they're always at the games. Whenever the boys are playing, they're there. And it's funny because I know how my dad was. He coached, I actually played baseball and softball, but really baseball with the boys until I was 16. And he was my coach. And he's tough. He was tough. And that's just, you know, the way he coached. And he's different with his grandsons. And I would say Lloyd is the same way. I've heard lots of stories about him as a coach. And he's definitely tamer with his grandsons and keeps everything a lot more positive, I think, than maybe I've heard happen. So it's funny to see them in that environment. But they're both, they love watching their grandsons play.
That's awesome. Tammi Carr is our guest here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Tell us about your faith, your walk with God, and maybe share a little bit of your testimony and what life was like growing up and kind of where that faith has brought you today.
Yeah, I grew up in a Christian home and went to church, and I've always had a strong faith. I have this memory of like being in church as a young adult, and the pastor was talking about how those times when you're tested and you just don't feel like you can do it anymore, and these big moments that reveal themselves to you about God's power and how He takes care of you. And I remember sitting there and thinking that I had never had anything like that happen in my life, that I had like this pretty easy path. Little did I know that, fast forward about 10 years and life would definitely shift. I think I've had my fair share of trials at this point. Yeah. And honestly, though, when Chad got sick, for me, I think some people get angry and turn away from God. It actually strengthened my faith. I saw so much that, people call them coincidences or whatever. We now call them Chad winks.
Yeah.
And we see them all the time. And I think that, when you're in an environment where the pressure is at that level, like when you have a child with a terminal disease, the only thing that got me through, I truly believe that was God's peace. And my faith is what held me together. I know that. I felt God's peace in those situations where you should not be able to be okay. I was okay. And I'm not saying it wasn't hard. It was the worst thing that anyone could ever go through. I believe that. But we are moving forward, and, we are moving forward on God's path. And we see those Chad winks every week, and they reinforce to us that we're doing the right thing. And I think that when people open their eyes to that, you can call coincidences or you can call it happenstance or whatever you may call it. But for us and how much we've seen of that, it's just not possible. We've seen God in a big way. And even though our story did not end with the miracle we wanted on this earth, we know that Chad was the miracle for others.
Yeah.
When we see what this foundation has accomplished in, 4 short years, not even 4 years, it is a miracle. I've worked in that world for a long time, and this is not normal. So we truly believe that he had a job to do while he was here. Yeah. And, I think he knew a lot more than we thought he did, too. And he wasn't scared. He was tough, and he was at peace. So that brings us peace, too. But I know for a fact that I would not have personally gotten through it without my faith.
That Chad Tough Foundation is something I definitely want to dive into in just a minute, and I'm sure it's something you never even wished existed in many ways, but it does. And before we get into that idea of the foundation and where it came from and some of the things that you've already touched upon, let's learn about the little guy for a little bit and what it's named for in Chad. And you kind of mentioned the terminal disease, and there's some people listening who may know the full story, and then there's some people who have no idea about what happened to Chad. So tell us a little bit about Chad, the young boy, and kind of the impact that he had on you when he was still here, and then maybe take us into what happened.
Chad was, he's our third son. He was our oopsie baby. We had sort of kind of decided was great, 2 healthy boys. We were, happy and things were good. And I worked at a children's hospital, so I had seen a lot of scary things. And I just said, we're blessed and I think we're good. And then, God had other plans. So Chad came along. Our 2 older boys, so CJ is 14 and Tommy is now 11. It's funny because the oldest is me. in male form. Like, I don't think he has any of his father's traits. And then Tammi is Jason. And I don't know that he has any of my traits. It's insane. They look like, CJ looks like me, Tammi looks like Jason, CJ acts like me, Tammi acts like Jason. And then there was Chad. And he was kind of the meld of both of us. Mm-hmm. He was different. He was so different than his brothers. He was a beautiful boy. He was just like gorgeous, and just people were drawn to him. He had this amazing smile and wonderful humor, personality. When we talk about the sports context, though, and it's funny because our other two boys came out of the room like ball. That was it, right? Like, they didn't like toys. They wanted balls. It was their first word. Like, I'm not exaggerating. Chad was different. He didn't really love sports. He would mess around with it a bit, but it wasn't the way that his brothers had been at that age. Right. He liked toys. He liked art. He liked music. And Jason and I, we would joke, like, oh, goodness, this is going to be different for us, because we were both raised in these families entrenched in sports, and this little one threw us for a loop. We were going to figure out how life was going to be with Chad. It was going to be interesting and different. Unfortunately, we never got to see how that went. When he was 3 years old, 3 days before his 4th birthday, he tripped and fell and broke his nose. And I took him to Mott Children's Hospital, and they said there really wasn't much they could do. It was a broken nose, no problem. And I took him home. And that night, and I really do believe this was God, I woke up from a dead sleep. And he had been having some sleep issues, and I was in bed with him, and I woke up from a deep sleep. And I just sat there thinking about the times he had fallen. And I knew he had fallen when we walked out of the hospital that afternoon. He'd fallen at gymnastics, and he had fallen, to break his nose. And it wasn't like this panicked feeling. Like, I know moms, if any of them are listening, they know what that is. You wake up in the middle of the night with that panic and anxiety. This was not that. It was just this, like, I remember being awake and thinking of this and saying, we need to take him back to the hospital. And I fell back asleep. Mm. So the next day, he was just not right. We just knew something was off. And so we took him back to Mott, and they really didn't even want to give him an MRI. We thought maybe it was a concussion. They really were not concerned at all. And we just knew something was off. So we really pushed it and said we would feel more comfortable if we waited here. He had eaten, so we had to wait some extra time before they could put him, sedate him to do the MRI. But we thought there's something not right here. But we never in our wildest dreams thought it was anything like DIPG, which was what he was diagnosed with. And an MRI that was supposed to take 2 hours turned into 3.5 hours, and we knew something was going on. And then, unfortunately, we were told that it was the worst possible diagnosis. DIPG is a brain tumor in the brain stem that is diffuse, so the healthy cells are within the cancerous cells, and it's in the brain stem, which controls breathing, heart function, basically everything to keep you alive. So there's no way to remove it. So that was the diagnosis we were given, which I will tell you is the worst day of my life because, people think, well, the day he passed away, but this was the day where you were taken from, to receive a diagnosis when you have absolutely no clue that there's really anything wrong with your child too.
Right.
He has about 9 months to live. That was the day that I'll never forget beyond the rest.
Did you retreat, Tammi, in a sense of just wanting to not talk to anybody or see anybody? And maybe that's a question to even ask after Chad had passed. Or did you kind of run towards people and surround yourself with community to get through this? Obviously, you're part of a pretty large community when you really talk about the extension of your father and your father-in-law. To know that there's always going to be a large amount of people. Michigan family is unlike most families I've seen as far as a college community of people. But did you retreat, or did you yearn for people to be around during this time?
Well, what was interesting? When we got the diagnosis, my legs fell out from under me, and I I don't know how long I laid on the floor of the PICU, but it was a while, and I physically could not move. And the doctor, they were talking to me, and they had called another doctor, put her on the phone, and they had the phone in my ear. And then Chad woke up, and they said, Chad just woke up, and he's asking for you. So what does your mom do? You get up. So that night I was mad, and I was definitely retreating. I remember them coming in, wanting to wake him up to do these tests, and I said, leave him alone. You basically just told us there's nothing you can do. Let him sleep.
Right.
And, they sent some more doctors in and said, we never said there's nothing we can do, but this is a dangerous thing, and things can happen quickly. We have to check him. And I was mad, and I didn't want anyone around. But then it was strange, and again, I think this is God. I woke up feeling very different. I slept in bed with Chad at the hospital that night, and I remember waking up, and I looked at Jason, and I said, we have got to do something. We have to make this huge. We have to get people praying for him, and that's how the whole thing started. It was, I want people to know about this disease, and I want people from wherever they are to be praying for my son. And my husband is a lot more private than I am, kind of an open book. He is not. He does not live his life that way. Even if, growing up as Lloyd Carr's son, you might think, that was something, he does not enjoy that. He does not enjoy the spotlight. Not that I do, but I am more transparent and open. And I just felt like we had to do this because 60 years ago, Neil Armstrong's daughter had died from the same disease, and the protocol they were giving our son was virtually the same. And I realized that, we had somewhat of a platform because of Lloyd to share this story and to get people praying for him and praying for a miracle. And so that's how the foundation actually started. It was a page on Facebook called Pray for Chad Carr. And that's what we were asking for. That was it. The foundation and money, and that just happened. People said, we want to help, and they just started sending stuff and sending checks. And so it kind of transformed. But initially, it was about prayer. And I didn't retreat after that first day. I was very open about our journey. I blogged about it on this Pray for Chad Carr page. I shared what was happening. And we really did share the journey. And that is ultimately, and the community support was incredible. I've never been a person who likes to take help. I'm kind of a control person, but when you're in a situation like that, you do what you have to do, and we would not have survived without the community that was around us. And that was, our Saline Ann Arbor community, and extended well beyond that to, the Michigan family that you speak about, which is an incredible group of people. And Michigan is family. We say that all the time. So basically, they helped keep us as a family afloat, and that community is what launched the Chad Tough Foundation.
Tell me about the process in that 9 months of Chad battling and fighting, and kind of maybe some of the lessons that you learned watching him. It's amazing. I always say, the greatest teachers in life are adversity and children to me, because you watch children battle and fight on all different levels of things, and you're just amazed at the resilience that they have. Tell me about that part of this, and maybe not just with you, but with your husband and with your other children, and just watching him go through this and fight through this battle, what you learned from that.
Well, we learned a lot from Chad, that's for sure. He ultimately survived 14 months.
14, okay.
And for the first 6, you wouldn't have known there was one thing wrong with him. He was no symptoms. We went through radiation. He did 30 rounds of radiation, which was the first thing that he had to endure, which is, he was sedated every day. It was a terrible, terrible month. But he basically never complained. He rarely cried. He was amazing. And you think about perspective. and things that you go through that are stressful. And then you watch this little boy being poked and prodded and put to sleep every day. And he jumps up on the bed and says, "Give me my sleeping medicine." You know, he was amazing. He had 2 brain surgeries. We did a clinical trial at Sloan Kettering where they inserted a catheter into his brainstem and tried a drug to see if it was a trial, basically a safety trial. And obviously it did not cure him, but it has ultimately proven that there are ways to get into the brainstem, and now it's about finding the right medication. So he did participate in the trial and had 2 brain surgeries that were 14 hours long each, and never complained. You know, he ultimately, in the end, he lost use of his legs and his arms, and it's a terrible disease. It takes away everything a child has.
Yeah.
And he never complained.
Yeah.
He would wonder sometimes, my leg isn't working right. But when you watch a child go through that, and when our kids watch their brother go through that, I mean, it changes you. And you have a new perspective on what's important in life and what is really difficult in life, too. So our entire lives really changed with that, and how we live our lives now. And we don't miss anything that our boys do. I think back to before Chad was sick, I had 3 boys under the age of 8 and running around like a crazy person, and 2 jobs, and and I don't know that I really embraced the moments. I just was busy, and I don't do that anymore. Believe me, I get busy I have a job, and we do the Chad Tough Foundation, but I have my priorities I don't miss my kids' stuff. I just don't. And we're there. And my husband quit his job when Chad he traveled a ton, and it just was not, when you're given that diagnosis and the amount of time you have, that's not an option. So we basically changed our lifestyle. And then when Chad passed away, he had to make a decision about what came next. And he wanted to be involved in the day-to-day of the Chad Tough Foundation. And it had gotten to a point then, it was so big at that point that if you're involved, you're in it every day. And if you're not, and you have another full-time job or whatever it may be, you're basically not involved, because this is a more than full-time job. Yeah. So he decided that he wanted to run the foundation. So, I mean, the salary is way different than what he made before, but that's not what's important to us. I mean, we're fine, and we're never going to be millionaires, but we're raising a lot of money for research, and that's more important to us. So Chad's given us all that perspective.
That's really good.
I think our boys have had to grow up in a way that others don't. I think there's a maturity about them that a lot of people that know them see. They're mature beyond their years, for sure.
Tammi Carr has been our guest here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Tammi, I know that sort of the Christian community, when tragedy hits or something very difficult happens for a person, we cling to a verse. I was actually looking at it on my phone as we're talking. In Romans 8:28, it says, "We know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them." And then there are others who say, how can you possibly say something good could come out of this when a mom and a family loses a child? But there is a lot of good, and you've talked about this foundation, and that's really where I want to kind of land the plane a little bit on this interview, is the foundation, and kind of take me through. Obviously it's awful what happened in having to lose your little boy, but there's a lot of good that's come out of this. So can you kind of share a little bit of that and the foundation, kind of the work it's doing? You mentioned it, raising money for research, but really just the day-to-day operations and why you feel compelled to continue to fight and share about Chad Tough today. Well,
I totally agree with you. There are definitely really good things that can come out of very bad situations. And I think our story is a really good example of that. You know, when Chad was diagnosed, I remember Jason saying, "Oh my gosh, we're kind of like the perfect family to have to deal with this." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, you know, my dad brings some attention to this. You've worked in development your entire career. We know all these doctors, so we have resources to be able to help us navigate this terrible situation. You know, a lot of families don't have that, and we're able to bring some attention to this and create change around it." And he was right. And, you know, I would give it up in a second, of course. I would do anything to have him back.
Yeah.
But I do really believe that there was a plan that we can't understand that is bigger than this one little boy, because what he's done is he's changing lives and saving lives. And I know ultimately he's going to be a large part of the cure when this disease is cured, which if you ask doctors now, they believe will happen in their lifetime. They wouldn't have said that 5 years ago. So that is real impact. You know, I talk about it a lot as if like, and one thing that I would say, we are blessed. I think a lot of families that go through something like this, they don't ever get to see, you know, life, I like to say it's like a tapestry, right? And you've got the back of the tapestry with all these knots coming together. And the knots aren't very pretty sometimes, and you don't really know what in the world they're doing when you look at the behind of the back of a tapestry, until you turn that tapestry over and see the pretty picture that has all those knots have connected to make. You know, you don't really get it. And I feel like that's what life is. And we've had some really bad knots. But the good thing is how we are blessed is we've been able to see a part of the picture. And I feel like a lot of families that lose children, they never get to see that pretty side at all. And because of the Chad Tough Foundation, we've gotten to see that because of his legacy and what it is doing to create change. We get to see it. And I would do anything to have this not be his role in life, his lot in life. I mean, believe me, we would all to have never heard of DIPG would have been the best thing that could have ever happened to us. But that wasn't our lot in life. And why not us, right? Like, you hear about bad things happening all over the world. Why should we be immune to that? You know, it does not discriminate. It can be anyone at any time. But the Chad Tough Foundation, you know, next year, which will be when Chad would have been turning 10 years old, which is kind of hard to believe. Right. We'll reach the $10 million number that we've raised through the foundation, $10 million for this disease, which is
that's awesome.
An insane amount of money around this disease.
Yeah.
For something that had little to no funding, that our boy is responsible for that. And our boy now has doctors feeling like there is hope. And our boy has young, bright minds saying, maybe I will focus on DIPG.
Yeah.
And our boy, through his journey, inspired people to turn to God. Yeah. So he's not only saving lives through the science, but he's brought people to Jesus. And I've heard that from so many people. So that is powerful.
I mean, that's it. That's what it's, I mean, honestly, that's what it's all about. And I know we talk a lot about on this interview and this show about faith and obviously about Christ. And, you know, in many ways, the world puts a hand up to that sometimes, right? Yeah. And it's so awesome to be able to see the life of this young boy open eyes up to that childlike faith that the Bible talks about and bringing people back to him. And I'm really curious about this, Tammi, because we ask this question as we close here to all of our guests. And I'm fascinated to think about what your answer might be. But what are you learning from God today? It's been 4 years, almost 4 years. It'll be November 23rd. It'll be 4 years that Chad went to be with the Lord. Tell me what you're learning from God today in this season of life that he has you in.
I'm learning every day. I can tell you that, and I'm not going to act like this is some easy road now, because it isn't.
Right.
And there are a lot of days that I don't want to do this. You think about this foundation, how personal it is, and we're living this and Chad's story every day, and it's hard. And so there are days I want to quit.
Yeah.
But God shows himself, and God shows us Chad. And I'll tell you, we call him Chad Winks. I mentioned him. Last weekend, we were in Pittsburgh and for a baseball tournament. And these things that happen oftentimes when we're on the road, the normal people, who don't live like our life, I think.
Sure.
They may call them just a coincidence, but they happen all the time. And when things like this happen to you, as often as they do to us, they cannot be a coincidence. Nobody can have this many coincidences. Random things. And I'll give you this example. I could go on and on for the number of these types of things that have happened to us over the years, since Chad was gone, are outrageous. But just last weekend, we were in Pittsburgh for a baseball tournament. We have this car that we drive in the road. We call it the Chad Tuffmobile. A dealer donates it, and it's all, it's got our logo and everything on it.
That's great.
We were parked at the hotel where the kids were playing, after they were finished with their game, and I parked the car and went in to go watch it in the pool. And I get a text message from Chase Winovich's mother.
Mm-hmm. Chase Winovich is the linebacker. Yeah, he's a linebacker with Michigan.
Yes. And now he plays for the Patriots. He was just drafted with the Patriots, and he raised a lot of money for us as a college athlete. His parents sent me a text, and they're like, "Are you in Pittsburgh?" And I'm like, "What?" And it was a picture of my car. And I'm like, "Yes." And they said, "We just biked past your car." I said, "Turn around and come to the hotel." So they came back. They live 20 minutes from this, never come to this area. I had happened to park in one of the 3 spots where you could see the car from the road. They happened to be with their daughter and taking a bike ride down a bike path past this hotel. And Chase is really involved and still is in what we do, and his family is incredible. And his dad's wearing an orange shirt, which is Chad's color, and we just were like, this is insane, the fact that we never come to this area. They never go to that area, and they just happen to drive right by the car. We connected, had some great conversation about Chase and things, how we're going to move forward and things that are going to happen moving forward with the foundation. And just one of those, blow you away moments, right? Happens all the time to us.
That's amazing.
On the way back from Pittsburgh to Ann Arbor, we're driving the Chad Tuffmobile, and this car pulls up next to us, and a guy puts his wrist out the window, and he's got our Chad Tuff wristband on. And he's got Pennsylvania plates. And we're like, oh, my gosh, look at that, right? He drives away, and we're all excited. I looked at my husband. I said, oh, my goodness, that looks like Eli Brooks, who plays for the Michigan basketball team. And he said, no, that's insane. That can't be Eli Brooks. I said, I swear that really looks like him. And he had driven away. I called my friend whose husband coaches for Michigan's basketball team, and I said, where's Eli Brooks from? She said, Pennsylvania. I said, are you kidding me? I said, can you please call him and find out if he just passed the Chad Tuffmobile on the road in Pennsylvania? And it was him.
Wow.
And these things happen, and we know that there's, I don't know what's coming with the Winoviches or with, Eli Brooks down the road with us in our journey, but we know that that's Chad saying, we see you. We see what you're doing. And these moments always come when we're feeling that frustration. It's like a little pick-me-up, like, look what you're doing.
Yeah.
I see you. God sees you. You're doing the right thing. You're on the path you're supposed to be on. And so God shows us those moments all the time. And for me, that's what keeps me going. It keeps us knowing we're doing God's work and Chad's work. Yeah. And that's what we have to do.
It's such good stuff there. That was Tammi Carr. And the website for Chad's foundation is chadtuff.org, chadtuff.org. And Tammi, just thank you for sharing Chad's story and your story too, and your whole family's story. And I'm glad that you are willing to share it. And I know it's 4 years, or so, 3.5 years, but it's still important to share it. And I'm grateful that you were able to come on the podcast and honestly intersect Jesus into because I don't know how people go through things like what you went through without a faith in the Lord. I really don't. So thank you so much for being here. And we're continuing to pray for you guys and wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you so much, Jason. Appreciate you having me.
And many thanks to Tammi Carr for being here on Sports Spectrum's podcast and sharing the story of her son, Chad. Again, the website, chadtough.org, if you feel compelled to donate or just want to tweet out or post something about their foundation. Obviously, it would be great. Any awareness is a good thing, I think, in a lot of ways. And they've raised close to $10 million for research, and it's just an awesome thing to see. And the mission, as it says on the website of the Chad Tough Foundation, is to inspire and fund game-changing research to discover effective treatments for pediatric brain cancer with an emphasis on diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma, DIPG. And I mean, it's amazing the impact that Chad is making on others, even in death, and just such a powerful story. And truly thankful to Tammi Carr for coming on the podcast and sharing her story of faith and her story, powerful story of young Chad. Best wishes to Tammi. Let's keep praying for the Carr family and praying for a cure. Just thinking out loud, no child should have to go through this. And if there is a cure out there, man, God, provide it through this foundation. How great would that be? So all the blessings and all the best to Tammi and the Carr family. Thanks to you for listening. We also want to thank our sponsors, Compassion International. We've told you about Compassion for over a year now, and they're doing great work releasing kids from poverty all across the world. Check out the website, compassion.com/sportspectrum, to find out more information about how you and your $38 a month can truly make a difference in a child's life. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum and consider sponsoring a child today. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Check out our website, sportspectrum.com, where this podcast will be found, as well as articles all day long on the intersection of sports and faith. We have a daily devotional every morning at 6 a.m. on sports and faith to help you get started right in the Lord. And we also have our magazine, which is just $18 for an entire year, and allows you to have a great, just tangible piece, witnessing tool in your hand to share with someone about sports and Jesus. Sports is a great way to introduce faith to someone who may not know who the Lord is. And our Sports Spectrum magazine is a great way to do that. It's $18. You can subscribe over at sportspectrum.com. Go to the website and subscribe today, sportspectrum.com. Thanks for listening. Thank you to Tammi Carr again for being here on the podcast. And thank you to you. We'll see you next time with a brand new episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. Have a great rest of your day.